All right, welcome to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran, and thank you for joining me on another edition of the show. Perhaps the biggest, or not the biggest, maybe the most surprising NBA trade that we've seen in many, many years took place this past weekend. Luka Doncic of the Dallas Mavericks is now a member of the Lakers. And it's one of those NBA transactions that I think that only the NBA really does well. You know, like NFL trades can be big, MLB trades and signings can be big, but the NBA has it on a totally different level, I think. And it's one of those things where you remember what you were doing, you remember where you were, you have to tell people about it because in many ways the NBA, I think Molly Morrison on social media has said this before, is the best TV show on out right now, right? Like it has all the drama, all the machinations, all the pettiness that you would want. And this deal really was indicative of that. So, first things first, let's kind of go through the deal. And it's not as complicated as many of these deals are. So the Mavericks trade Luka Doncic to the Los Angeles Lakers. In return, they get Anthony Davis, Max Christie, and a unprotected first round pick in 2029. The Utah Jazz got involved here as well. They take on Jalen Hood Schifino, role player from the Lakers, and they get a couple of second round picks for their trouble. And the kind of the basketball nerd aspect of that is, of course, Danny Ainge with the Jazz kind of got in at the last second to get a couple of picks. But that's the trade. And when you consider that this is a player in his prime, 25 years old, who is at worst the fourth best player in the NBA. So you would probably rank him below Jokic. You'd rank him maybe below Giannis. And depending on how you feel about Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, you're either having that third or fourth. And then if there's a little bit of a drop off, then you get into guys like Jason Tatum, Anthony Edwards, Jalen Brunson, those type of players. So it's a shocking trade, one, that a team would trade a player that good, that young, and not get a king's ransom of draft picks in return. And a lot has come out since then, that Dallas had concerns about Luka's weight, that they had concerns about just like him signing the Supermax extension and staying in Dallas long term. And I kind of want to talk about all that, right? So let's begin with the Lakers side. If you're the Lakers, a lot of people hate the Lakers, and it's because they're kind of like the New York Yankees of the NBA. They're the team that plays in this glamorous market that all these stars end up playing for, right? And you really go back to, right, going all the way back to like George Mikan. They've always had a premier superstar, give or take, ever since the 60s. They had George Mikan, they had Elgin Baylor and Jerry West, they brought in Wilt Chamberlain, they brought in Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and had drafted Magic Johnson, and they ran the 80s in that way. And then in the 90s, they had a couple of down years in the early 90s, but then they get Shaq. They trade for Kobe Bryant, and they have the years of Kobe. They get Pau Gasol for pennies on the dollar in that Kwame Brown deal in the 2000s. Then, after it seems like they're going to have a down period after Kobe retires, they get LeBron James. They win a title. They trade for Anthony Davis before winning that title. And now they've taken Anthony Davis and turned it into Luka Doncic, one of the best players in basketball. And it's kind of what the Lakers do, right? And for them, it's a simple calculation. LeBron is 40, going on 41. He has at most a couple of years of high-level production left. Now, if you ask LeBron, he would say he has 5 years of high-level production left. But more the defense is already kind of faded. He still is a tremendous offensive player, but your 10-year plan doesn't center around LeBron James. Anthony Davis himself, while he has been tremendous these past couple of years, is a little injury prone, and he's 32 years old, right? So short term, the Lakers had, you know, an idea of what they were doing, but long term, they weren't sure. Like, who's the next guy that we're going to get? They're not bad enough to get a top level draft pick, but they're also not good enough to really be competing for titles right now. They're kind of stuck in that aspect, so they got to make a trade. So they make the trade for Luka Doncic, and they have now secured their next 10 years. Luka's 25 now. You would assume his prime is going to go throughout into his early 30s. So at worst, it's 8 years. And in the immediate future, they have a pairing of Luka and LeBron. They're probably going to have to get some sort of big man depth at the deadline here that's coming up in a couple of days, or through the buyout market after the deadline. But for them, that's really the calculation. To secure your future for the next 10 years, it's worth losing out on Anthony Davis. It's worth giving up Max Christie, and it's worth only giving up one pick. It is setting them up for a championship run there, assuming that once LeBron fades away here in the next couple of years, that they can be able to lure or trade for somebody else that's going to play alongside Luka, and then you're going to have more of a championship window here in LA. I think that if they, get a top 6 seed in the West, we might be looking at Rob Pelinka as winning the GM of the Year, Executive of the Year award in the NBA, because this is just a heist. You never have seen it, to get a guy that's at the peak of his powers, isn't even 26 yet, is all NBA 5 years in a row, was the steal of his draft, not get extended by the team that he was drafted to. We're in this NBA right now where a lot of times when you draft a superstar, they're kind of locked in for that first 8 or 9 years, because they're going to sign that first extension because you, as the incumbent team, are able to kind of sign them to a higher number. And they're generally going to sign that second extension with the Supermax because it's such a great amount of money. And, Luka now misses out on that because he is being traded and is not with his original team, where what could have been a $345 million deal that would have equated to $68 million a year. The most the Lakers can give him now, I think it's $230 over 5. So it's a pretty big drop off for him in terms of capable of earning potential and all that. And if you're the Lakers, this is a no-brainer, right? That's the easy part. The difficult part is the Mavericks. What does this signal for them? I'll be honest, I cannot really truly understand or fathom where they're coming from on this. This is a team that a few years ago, were in the Western Conference Finals, playing against the Warriors, who would eventually win the title. Last year, they were in the NBA Finals. They had acquired Kyrie. It was a trade that worked. They had acquired PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford. Those moves worked. And this seemed like a team that was going to be contending for titles. Luka, of course, has gotten hurt this year. The Mavs themselves are dealing with all sorts of injuries. Lively just got hurt. He's probably done for the regular season. Kyrie has battled with some injuries. A lot of these guys have been hurt this year. And, they're kind of in the play-in mix right now. They're that 9-10 spot in the West. And, that's no given right now either, because with the way Portland has been surging, they might be giving them and Golden State a run for their money, oddly enough, believe it or not. So they felt like, is this a guy that we could continue to win with in the long term? And the crazy thing is that, so you see the trade happening, right? And, I'm texting with my friends who are Mavericks fans back and forth and NBA fans back and forth. And they're saying, why would they do this? I don't understand. And then the reports start happening, right? You start seeing Tim McMahon reporting that his conditioning was a concern. And, Luka He has fun in the offseason. When he comes back into the NBA season, a lot of times he's a little overweight. But the thing is, it's not like he's not productive. He's still dropping 35 points a night, even with being quote unquote overweight. And Nico Harrison, the GM for the Mavericks, who's caught a lot of heat in the wake of this trade, is just like, we value defense. That's why we targeted Anthony Davis. And, we want people that are bought into our culture, blah, blah, blah. What it really says to me is that there is some disconnect between Luka and the front office. They didn't like the fact that he showed up out of shape. They didn't like the fact that his conditioning was a concern. And hey, maybe we're talking about a guy who doesn't really care about, his body and might break down by the time he's 30. But you kind of take that risk normally, right? You kind of go out on a limb and say, you know what, that's fine. It's worth the chance. That's why the Pelicans have not traded Zion Williamson yet. The talent is so great that it's worth kind of dealing with the weight management issues or the commitment issues. That's just the way the NBA works. It's a star league. You kind of deal with the bullshit with the star as long as they want to be on your team. And all indications were Luka wanted to be a Maverick. He didn't want to request a trade. He wanted to stay there. And that's kind of something you see a lot in with European stars. They generally don't want to leave. Once they get somewhere, it's fine. There isn't like a glamorous type of market appeal for them. Whereas like playing in Miami or LA or New York or Boston or wherever is a big draw for a lot of American players. For European players, they're in a foreign country regardless. They don't care if it's Oklahoma City or New York City, right? It doesn't really matter to them, for the most part. We haven't really seen a European star ask out in that regard. And all indications are that Luka did not ask out. And this was the Mavericks' decision. So what do they have now? They have Anthony Davis. They get Max Christie, of course. And they have Kyrie Irving. They just traded Quentin Grimes. And now they bring back Caleb Martin. And so this feels like a team that has made a decision that their window is now. They have a 3-year window to do something, to win a title. And they think they could do it with Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving. Now, can they? I think that they still don't really match up with Oklahoma City really well. They are going to have trouble kind of getting past the 6th spot, I think, in the West. So, and you're really banking a lot on Anthony Davis staying healthy, on Kyrie Irving staying healthy, on Derek Lively coming back. And, big thing that you've heard out of Lakers camps is that Anthony Davis kind of really hated the fact that he has to play center. Even though he, is deployed in center lineups and configurations, he prefers to play power forward. So with the Mavs, he has Gafford and Lively, 2 guys who could suck up a lot of the center minutes. The reality is that late in games, Anthony Davis is probably playing center. That's just kind of what's going to happen, because you're going to have PJ Washington and all these other guys. And, it's going to be something that is probably going to happen, even though he wants to play power forward. And I think that Nico Harrison here is really showing that he doesn't think he's going to have a job in a few years. So he's thinking, all right, how can I maximize winning now? And he had his doubts about Luka, leading him to a title. And my thing about that is you were just in the finals. And, the crazy thing right now is the Mavs and the Wolves were both conference finalists in the West last year. Both now have made seismic trades that are probably made them worse. The Wolves get rid of Karl Anthony Towns, who's having a great season up until the last couple of games in New York. They get back Dante DiVincenzo, who's now done for the year, or at least for an extended period of time, and Julius Randle, who's been kind of a clunky fit with Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert. And now the Mavericks, who made the finals, won the Western Conference Finals, trade Luka Doncic to LA and get Anthony Davis back in the hopes that he'll stay upright, anchor them to another finals appearance. It feels like sometimes these teams, they want to make this move and shake things up so much that they end up having a kind of a crisis of identity in a way. Like you think that you're something that you're actually not. And it's just kind of a little upsetting, I'd say, from a team building and just kind of looking at the NBA perspective. So let's think about the expectations now moving forward for both teams. For the Mavs, I think that you're looking at a team that should be a playoff team that should be in the second round, right? I just don't think that they have enough to compete for a title. And for the Lakers, yeah, you're in title talks now, right? You are going to be you're going to be kind of getting the odds to win in the West now because Luka has done pretty well against OKC himself, right? So this is a team that is capable. This is a guy who's capable of being OKC, and now you could have like the idea of potentially LeBron playing a little bit more off ball, and they got to make a move for a big man. You know, I know that there's reports of them kind of asking around about the Knicks Mitchell Robinson. That would be a good fit. You know, they got a maybe a Clint Capella if Atlanta's looking to move off of him post deadline. These are guys that I think they could probably go after. You need like a rim protector, shot blocker type because Jackson Hayes alone isn't going to do that for them. And this kind of leads me into the whole conspiracy theory aspect, like Jason Whitlock the other day. And, it's probably not the greatest idea to be quoting Jason Whitlock, but he brought up a point. And he said that the league needed this to happen for LA, for the Lakers, because of the sagging ratings, and they needed something to boost the domestic product. When the irony, of course, is that Whitlock was recently railing on foreign-born players, saying that Americans don't want to watch foreign-born players, and Luka, of course, is a foreign-born player. So there's a little bit of a hole in his argument there, but there's just like this theory that the NBA rigged it for the Lakers to get Luka, rigged it to be able to make them competitive again. And Lakers haven't been in the doldrums or anything. They run into Denver 2 years in a row and haven't had the horses to beat Jokic and company, right? I wouldn't. So I'm always careful with the whole rigging thing, but it's just a thing where the Lakers always get their guy. The Yankees historically have always gotten their guy. That's just the way it goes, right? It's just these big market, heavy brand name teams, they just find a way to sign these players. There's a mystique that comes with putting on the Laker uniform and playing in Los Angeles and, the crypto.com arena is what it's called now, Staples Center before. There's a mystique that comes there. But what I think is something that's a little interesting here is the fact that the Mavericks and Nico Harrison specifically didn't call any other team. Why wouldn't you maximize the asset? I would argue maybe next to Wembanyama in San Antonio and maybe Jokic to a certain degree. Luka's the most valuable asset in the NBA today, and you traded him without consulting with other teams. You could have potentially gotten a package around Embiid. You could have contacted Milwaukee about Giannis, potentially. You could have talked to Miami about Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. You could have contacted Oklahoma City and gotten a boatload of picks. You could have done so many different things to get this guy somewhere, and instead, you only talk to the Lakers. And I think that sets an interesting precedent where trades now in the NBA have gotten really complicated with the second aprons and luxury taxes and stuff like that. So a lot of times I think you're going to have these guys who are relying on relationships. So reason being is that Nico Harrison, who used to work at Nike, he had a relationship with Kobe, who obviously had a relationship with Rob Pelinka. And, there's connective tissue there. So maybe he felt comfortable talking to Rob Pelinka. And the crazy thing about it is that Rob Pelinka kind of wanted, the initial offer was to ask for more. Pelinka kind of said, well, you're down talking this guy's health. I'm going to take away one of these picks. I'm going to take away one of these players. And he just did it. And that's just the crazy thing about it, that Harrison just did it. And now we don't even know what a superstar's trade value is. Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert both went for a lot of picks. Mikal Bridges went for a lot of picks. Kevin Durant went for some picks, but not as many as you might think. And it's just kind of like, what is the value of a high-end superstar? And it really kind of comes down to the fact that it's kind of boiled down to relationships now. It's like, all right, I know this guy. I know he'll take care of this guy. And let's just kind of send them over there and not fielding the best offer. Because I think also teams want to be perceived as taking care of players in some way, shape, or form. Right now, if I was a star player, I'd be hesitant to even consider the Mavericks. And because this is a guy who could have made supermax money, who wanted to stay there, wanted to sign the extension, wanted to play there. And you're just going to go ahead and say, you know what? I'm going to send you out, and you're going to lose $100 million as a result in potential earnings. Now, Luka being in LA, sponsorship deals, exposure, that sort of thing, he'll get that money back, and he's not hurting for money, so to speak. But it is something that if I was a player, I'd be kind of a little hesitant to kind of consider signing with Dallas. And the thing that kills me about Dallas, they're acting like they're a small market team. They're a top 5 media market in the country. They got no state income tax. They're centrally located, so traveling to different venues is incredibly easy. So easy to get out east, easy to go out west, easy to go up north if you're going to like Toronto or Detroit or Chicago. So there's a lot of benefits with Dallas, and there's a history of winning with Dirk Nowitzki. It just seems like they're a little unsure of what to do here, and they kind of panicked, and Nico panicked, and it set up the future of Lakers basketball for the next 10 plus years. Who they go after in the next couple of years is going to be incredibly fascinating. What the Mavericks do after this is also fascinating, because in 3 years' time, once Kyrie and AD are in their mid-30s, two guys who have trouble staying healthy, and their skills are probably going to diminish after more injuries. What do? What is their plan? We don't know what their plan is. And, is it wasn't accumulate draft picks for the future, or else they would have traded with a different team that was offering more than one pick. It's just a very confusing deal. And when it comes out for Luka, I mean, he's going to probably end up winning an MVP as a Laker. He's probably going to sign a long-term deal with them. LeBron, he could very well extend LeBron's career. And just an all-time heist by the Lakers and Rob Pelinka. And, they win again, And you look through, there have been very little gap years for the Lakers. Whereas, like, you look at, like, a team like the Celtics, right? They had their run in the 80s. And then the 90s are kind of weird, right? Like D. Brown, Reggie Lewis, eventually Antoine Walker, eventually Paul Pierce. And then, they get in their big 3 era. But there's a pretty big gap there of relatively mediocre Celtics basketball. The Lakers don't have that. They had it for like 1 or 2 years because, like, they had the Magic Johnson era, and that kind of extended into the very early 90s into 91. Then obviously the HIV diagnosis happens. And then they try to have this weird little rebuilding type couple of years with Eddie Jones and Nick Van Exel and the early years of Shaq. And then Shaq and Kobe happens, and it's just like they just continue to find a way to get the guy. And it's because they're the Yankees. They're the Dodgers, a premier destination that players want to put on their uniform. They want to play in that arena. They just want that, right? So huge win for the Lakers. Head scratching move for the Mavs, and ultimately probably a huge win for Luka to continue on the path of writing his story as an NBA superstar. And this is a guy who's probably going to end up being a top 15, top 20 player of all time. So just a crazy NBA moment for the Lakers, the Mavs, and really the whole NBA community. That's going to wrap up another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to another episode of the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to follow and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next time, I'm your host, Omar Zaran. See you later.